At BMO Insurance, we're not just offering policies. We're delivering trust, innovation, and momentum. With tools like Smart App, Rover AI, and soon SegFund e-application, we're streamlining insurance for advisors and clients alike. Our people make the difference. A national team of experts dedicated to understanding your needs and your market. Here, customer experience isn't a touch point. It's the whole point. We're committed to our communities, supporting local sports teams and grassroots initiatives across the country. Because at the end of the day, insurance doesn't evolve on its own. It takes people, purpose, and the will to do better. Smarter, faster, more human. Welcome to BMO Insurance.
At BMO Insurance, digital evolution never stops. Rover Phase 3 brings 7 major enhancements, from tighter search and faster indexing to new health-related search capabilities. It's more accurate, quicker, and smarter. 3,000 questions asked by 400-plus users across 20 MGAs, and we're delivering results. That's not an upgrade, that's momentum. BMO is building on the strength of our tools. Our e-application Smart App makes applying for life and CI products easier, helping ensure applications are complete and accurate for more efficient processing. Accelerated underwriting is powering decision-making with 61% straight-through processing rate for healthy applicants, reducing cycle time while improving client experience. And Smart Delivery is putting advisors in control with real-time policy delivery, automated status updates, and immediate return of settlement documents for processing. Rover, Smart App, Accelerated Underwriting, and Smart Delivery. These are just tools. They're the next step in a smarter, faster advisor journey.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to LifeFWD. My name is Gregory Young, and I'll be your host today. The LifeFWD webinar series is geared towards you and the things that help you. So, really excited today to talk about longevity and rethinking longevity. There's so much information out there, and I'll be joined today by 2 experts in their fields. I'll be joined by Taya and Katarina, and they will provide insight and knowledge that'll be extremely helpful for you understanding longevity. So please welcome Taya and Katarina. Hi Taya, thank you for joining. Katarina, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So much of the information that we're hearing from, whether through social media, podcasts, the news, it puts us in different directions and we don't know what to believe. So with so many issues and so many things, we talk to our doctors on an annual basis and everything is always fine. But is it? How do we make sense of the information that's coming at us and what can we do? So my first question is to Katarina. What can we do about this? What can we do about all the information that's thrown at us?
I think it's hard. I think when we think about, longevity and all of the social media information that we have coming at us, we have to really weed through the fiction and what's real and what's not. I know as an underwriter and Taya as a physician, we oftentimes think of things in evidence-based medicine and science, and that's where we're grounded in. I would say what's concerning for me is the fact that longevity and the discussion of longevity and chronic disease may not be keeping up with the pace of medicine. So when you think about it, none of us really think about our longevity and our mortality until something happens to us. And unfortunately, it's either we get diagnosed with a disease or an illness or someone close to us, like a family member or a friend does. And sometimes then is only when we really, really take the time to think about it. When we think about longevity, we cannot think about the discussion of lifespan and health span. Lifespan, and we're in the insurance business, so we know this really well, it's our chronological outcome and our life expectancy, and we measure that really well in insurance. And for the most part, males, it's 80, and females, it's 84. But when we think about health span, we really want to think about how well are we going to live in those years, and what is the quality of our life going to be? And that's particularly important when we think about the later years in life. It's funny, my boss gave me this book, and I didn't really read it all, if I'm totally honest. But one of the things that this surgeon oncologist actually out of the US said is this notion that resonated with me about medicine 3.0. And he talked about in medicine 1.0, really, this was centuries ago where we had plagues and viruses and, there was chronic and quick disease, and we didn't have science at that time. And along came in medicine 2.0 science, where we had a hypothesis, and then we researched that hypothesis, and we validated it, and we took it one step further with peer-reviewed studies, and we came up with things such as antibiotics, and we treated infection, and we treated disease. So we treated these what we call quick deaths, right? And so our life expectancy doubled. So we went from 30s, back in the day, to 60 and 70, we doubled that. But what we didn't do was we cured these quick diseases, but we did not cure the long diseases and the slow diseases. And that, I feel, is what most of us are suffering from today. And a slow disease, you might ask, what is that, right?
I was going to ask that question. So, what is a slow disease?
Slow diseases are something, the most prevalent one and probably the most common one that we're all used to and we hear about a lot, and I wrote an article about this, is metabolic disease. So that's when someone is a little bit overweight, and then they get a little bit of high blood pressure, and they get a little bit of cholesterol, and then the next thing you know, they go for their physical, like you said, and their hemoglobin A1C goes up, and they're a type 2 diabetic. And then they're on a full-fledged trajectory to cardiovascular and cerebral vascular disease. So this notion of medicine 3.0 is prevention, and it's grounded in prevention. And how do we get ahead of that, right? And our doctors, nothing against doctors, but they're not really taking an approach at a younger age to intervene from a preventative standpoint. I mean, if you take like a 20 or 30-year-old and they go into their family doctor's office, the pre-test probability of them having cardiovascular disease is next to none. Like it's almost zero, right? In the absence, of course, of a family history or some clinical chest pain or some other symptoms. When I was 20 and 30, like I had no problem going and buying a pair of shoes or boots that may have been $100 or $200 because you really don't think about money. But it's no different than when you're 60, right? You look back and you say to yourself, I wish I would have saved more. And your health is no different, right? It's that runway that you have, if you know what you know when you're a little bit older, I think it makes a big difference.
If you set the tone at a younger age for a healthier lifestyle, it'll pay dividends down the road, is what you're saying.
Yeah, take action ahead of time.
Right, take action, that's that 3.0.
That's right. The message here is if you had the information and you knew about it, what would you do differently? And what path would that take you on? And so when we think about those chronic diseases, that's something that would help.
And Taya, from a physician standpoint, what's your thoughts on this?
I love that there is a concept of medicine 1, 2, and 3, 3.0. And I think that in Canada, we've left 2.0 and we are on the way to 3.0. And here are my reasons why I think that. So we know that cardiovascular medicine had lots of achievements. And one of the reasons was that development of medicine and intervention methods. So that's all known and described as medicine 2.0. However, now we are treating the risk factors that are causing development of cardiovascular disease. And this would be the hypertension, which is one of the leading causes because it creeps up very suddenly. And it's important to go to the physician's office because nobody in their 30s, especially at home, wouldn't think, I wonder if I have high blood pressure. They just don't. The other thing that's being asked there, what is the family history, just like you mentioned, Katarina. And it is great because if someone has an increased risk of developing cardiovascular disease early, that's going to be identified there. And if someone has a family history of early cardiovascular disease, and we're not going to go into details what that is, but so if there is such, then there are going to be more tests done, definitely. And the coronary calcium can be done as well depending on the family history.
You've talked about family history and hereditary diseases, which scares me beyond belief. And then I'm starting to think in my mind with regards to, okay, when did that family relative, when did my wife's family relative, and I'm thinking through that. Do you find today, there's so many Canadians without a doctor, right? And they're seeing, maybe too many walk-in clinics, but should they be bringing this up with their doctor about the hereditary illnesses? Because I know with my own physician, and I'm glad he's not watching this, but he doesn't ask me about the hereditary. And if it did, maybe it was pretty quick, it wasn't. But should patients bring this up, the hereditary?
That's actually an excellent question, definitely. If there is, and we're talking about immediate family, but if there is concerning diagnosis in not immediate family, but further, I would mention that as well. But in general, the immediate family, mother, father, siblings.
I think to keep it really simple, like doctors, and I don't want to speak for Taya, but pretest probability for a physician is 10 years, right? So if you're coming in and your pretest probability of getting a particular disease or disorder, particularly when you're younger, is outside of that 10 years, they're not going to do anything, right? So it's really up to you to get ahead of it. And that runway that I talked about earlier, and making sure that you're aware of what those diagnostics look like and what you can do to help. And there's new tests out there.
So Katarina, I'd like to change gears a little bit and ask about VO2 max. We're starting to hear a lot more about it. It's in my social media feeds. I'm seeing a lot. Historically, I only saw it with athletes getting ready in preseason. But can you talk about VO2 max?
Sure, VO2 max is the newest buzzword or trend word. I wouldn't say it's new, but I would say a lot of individuals are getting them as part of their executive physicals. When I say it's not new, I only say that we've been measuring cardiovascular respiratory output for a long time. And in the insurance space, which we're not really going to talk about today, we used to do it through stress ECGs, right? So we'd put someone on a treadmill, and we make them go to peak exercise through various intervals, and then we do that on a gradient of 1 to 10 METs, and we would measure them. When we think about VO2 max for the audience, to keep it really simple, VO2 max is when you're put either on an ergometer bike, so you're biking on an stationary bike, okay, or you're on a treadmill and you've got a mask on, and the technician is beside you, and you're going, right? Whether you're bicycling or you're on the treadmill, and the technician is raising that interval level higher and higher and higher until you can't go no more. Then when you can't go no more, what they're doing is they're measuring the amount of oxygen that you're intaking and how is your body using that oxygen, right? And then that's measured, the difference between the oxygen you intake to the one that you output, by way of milliliters per kilogram of body weight per minute, right? And not to get too detailed, we can put
This is already intimidating me beyond belief. I'm thinking of how quickly I would die on that pace, but nonetheless, yes.
Well, that's an important point, right? Because people put too much emphasis on what the number is, but what's really important is if you do the test and you're on the lower 25 percentile of that test, what does that mean for all-cause mortality, right? And that number is pretty significant. That number is like 15%. Right?
What do you mean there? So break that down for me. It's 15%. What does that mean?
Meaning that if you do your VO2 max and your score, you have a chart, and the chart is based on male, female, as well as age. If you're in the lower percentile, so you've got a really high VO2 max, you've got an average max, and then you've got a below. If you're in that below or that lower percentile, you have a higher risk by 15% of all-cause mortality. And that is a concern, right? VO2 max, a lot of people love it. I say executives love it, and especially when it's on their wearable. One thing to remember is it has its limitations, right? And so with VO2 max, 2 or 3 things, and I'll just bring them up just because it's important in layman's terms, is if you and me have the exact same athletic ability, right, and we can go the same way, you may have a 40% lower VO2 max purely on your genetics. And that's a hard stop. Right? Even though we have the exact same athletic ability.
Right.
Similarly, if Taya and I, who are the same, let's say age, the same, like female, we're both female, we have a target score, we go on, but I'm really into it that day and she's not into it that day. We could have a different score just from how you approach the test, right? And
Every day is a different day, could be different scores on a different day.
Yeah, we see that on stress tests all the time.
Yes.
But I would say, that the last point I'll make is that, VO2 max, high scores of VO2 max are actually correlated with arrhythmias, conduction disease. So things such as atrial fibrillation. So they're not necessarily the gold standard of measurement, but they are very important for longevity and something that one should consider holistically when looking at what your longevity looks like.
So the higher the VO2 max score, the higher probability of greater longevity. And Thea, from a physician standpoint, what's your kind of viewpoint on this VO2 max and all this information that Katarina just shared?
It's an excellent test and gold standard to measure cardiometabolic fitness level. And if someone is in the top 2.5% in comparison with the bottom 25%, the bottom 25% has 5 times increased risk of dying from any cause, all-cause mortality. So with this information, well, you can imagine how much you would want to be as far as possible from the bottom 25% and somewhere closer to the top, although it is rare that someone is in that 2.5%. However, you kind of want for your age to be in excellent shape or in very good shape.
So Thea, what truly makes optimal health from your perspective as a physician?
If we consider someone to be in excellent health, that would include physical as well as mental health. So there is some component in mental health. So we would consider cognition and emotional well-being as well. But in general, you want holistic picture to have a sort of like a harmonious development of all aspects.
And Katarina, from your perspective, that optimal health.
Yeah, I agree with everything Thea said. I think it's, for me, the two probably biggest things to think about when you're thinking about longevity, because that's what we're here to talk about today, is your physical health, so your body, the machine that you have, and how is that machine operating, and then your cognitive health and your emotional health. And we don't spend a lot of time talking about that latter. And in the context of longevity, which is what we're talking about, if the latter suffers, you really won't have a great health span. And that's what we talked about a little bit earlier. If I go to my doctor, they might say, reduce your sugar, reduce your fat, exercise more, sleep more, right? Mm-hmm. But what does it really mean when we think about the conversation of prevention, right? And so when we think about your exercise, if I go to my doctor, she might say, well, exercise more. But for me personally, I need to lift weights and I need to lift heavy and I need to do that regularly. Like that's what Katarina needs, right? Nutrition-wise, the same thing, eat better. But when it comes to sleep, they almost have virtually no training, right? There's sleep apnea, which they might be aware of, and they treat clinical disease and symptoms, but they don't necessarily have a lot of training there. Sorry, Thea, you wanted to say something?
Yes, not that I wanted to interject, but I feel compelled to say something nice about Canadian physicians as well. They do have staff members that know about nutrition, dietitians or nutritionists, and if someone has a question, there will be a person to answer that. So the doctors usually can give you some information, but they don't go into the depth of it. And when it comes to exercise, you are right. Typical training doesn't include what kind of exercise you have to do and how much you have to lift weights and etc. Because that's not really part of the job. But they could give recommendation who to ask and who to discuss with. So that way they can cover these areas. And when it comes to sleep, they usually do ask about how is your sleep. But then if you say that I'm having insomnia, typical recommendations would be like, for example, have the sleep hygiene routine, like have a dark atmosphere in the room and low light and put your
phone away.
Put phone away or tablet or so on, electronic devices, and have a warm bath. If it doesn't work, then we're going to talk about the medication, because they don't like to give out the medication right from the first complaint. And now if your spouse or significant other is going to complain about you snoring, then it's going to be a different conversation about sleep apnea.
But can we, even on the topic of medication, right? Doctors are trained in medication, right? That's what they're trained on. And I appreciate all of that. But medication treats symptoms, it doesn't treat disease, right? And so,
Absolutely.
and we have to remember that, because a lot of people think that, when a doctor prescribes medication, it's going to cure it. And I keep grounding us in this conversation of prevention,
That's
right?
a good point.
And one thing that I think, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I think it's really important to talk about, is hormones. Right? So we spend a lot of time talking about female hormones and hormone replacement therapy, but we don't talk about male hormones, right? Like male testosterone drops as a vertical, like quickly, right? And it hits them like a bus. And so the question becomes, are physicians trained at, talking about that even with men, right? And with women, when it comes to hormone replacement therapy, there's a big divergence in how that's even approached. There's one study that was outdated, and it made a lot of doctors, including gynecologists, really scared about what that meant in taking hormone replacement therapy. And I'm not invalidating that. I mean, definitely if you have a family history of breast cancer or colon cancer or of cardiovascular disease, maybe that's not the right choice for you. But I do think it's important that education, with new studies come out, where we can actually see and make informed decisions. Because we do know that it can be preventative for Alzheimer's disease, for osteoporosis. There's lots of good data around that, and physicians aren't really necessarily up to date with that.
So next question, Katarina, with regards to exercise, what's the impact exercise can have in general terms?
Exercise is so important, but even more important than exercise is strength, right? I keep telling us we're talking about longevity, right? So having strength as you get older is really important. And muscle mass, I would say, is critical. When you think about as you get older, we all lose decade after decade more and more muscle. And muscles and liver actually hold about 80% of our glucose, and they get rid of that glucose. And so if your muscles aren't working properly, then later on in life, you could develop impaired glucose. You could get type 2 diabetes, all of the things that we talked about a little bit earlier. So muscle mass, I think, is critical. And it's even more critical when we get older, because we think about things like frailty and fragility. And sarcopenia is the medical term, but we won't go into that. But frailty and fragility play a pivotal role in mortality and morbidity as people get older. Think about it, Greg. Like when you get older, right? Like if you set a goal for yourself that you want to buy a sports car, but it's really low, but you want to get
that midlife crisis sports car. I'm not going to go there, Katarina.
But think about it, right? If your goal is, I want to get out of that sports car that's low on the ground when you're 75 and 80 years old, that to you right now seems like, what's the big deal? But when you're 75 and 80, it is a bigger deal, right?
And when you talk about losing muscle mass, for males and females, it's obviously different. But when does that impact someone? Because, it's going to be different probably for every person. But when do you start lifting heavier weights? And when do you start, because we're seeing it on social media, right? It's lift heavy, eat protein, lift heavy, eat protein. Right? So from an exercise, when should, males start thinking about, I should be working out, I should be exercising, I should be lifting?
Well, it goes to that part about doing it ahead of time and getting ahead of it, because there's muscle memory. But when you're, 75 years old, right, you can take as many protein shakes as you want and as many supplements and eat as much protein as you want, but it's going to be harder for you.
Right.
And I keep grounding us back to getting ahead of it in the whole medicine 3.0 and getting ahead of that prevention. And a lot of people ask, well, how much exercise should I do? And I think like anything, don't be prescriptive about it. It's however much you can do. Look, we're all busy. We have lives, we have children, we have extracurricular activities. But the question is, are we really making excuses, or are we just not putting in any time? So I would offer that the absence of exercise and not doing any exercise has a greater risk to you than how much you do, right? And without getting too technical, running on a treadmill and spiking your cortisol in a type A personality, I wouldn't say is exactly the best thing. But focus on longevity with muscle mass. I would say that would be the biggest takeaway. But I don't know, Taya, how you feel about that, and if there's anything you would add.
We try to encourage people to exercise, and if someone is a couch potato, the risk of all-cause death is similar to smoking, pretty much. So you want this person to be encouraged to get up and move, and he may never make it to the 2.5% of being most active, but even if exercise is 90 minutes per week, it's already a 15% reduction in all-cause mortality. So maybe there's going to be some encouragement with that.
And I think that when it comes to cardiovascular, I mean, if you need to do it because you need to lose weight, by all means do it. But I think most of us running around get good cardiovascular. What we have to be more deliberate on is the weights and weight training when we're talking about longevity.
It helps with osteoporosis quite a bit. So if women start with weightlifting, there is definite evidence that their bone mass is better when they age.
Changing gears a little, with regards to sleep, we've talked a little about sleep and we mentioned it, but none of us get enough. The reality is, as I get older, I feel like I'm sleeping less and less. But Katarina, what's the impact sleep can have on longevity?
I think sleep is probably one of the most underestimated factors that impacts longevity. And you're right, a lot of us don't get enough sleep. And when we sleep, there's critical things that happen, right? We have a lot of oxidative stress, as we go through life. And so when we're sleeping, that helps and it repairs. We actually produce a growth hormone when we sleep, and that sleep actually goes to our cells and it repairs them. Similarly, when we're fighting off diseases and disorders and you're sleeping, your immune system works harder and stronger and has the ability to repair itself when you're sleeping. I think sleep, if you don't get enough of it, Greg, and this is really important in your role, I think your focus and your concentration and your memory can go. And there's some studies that even say that, you can develop dementia and Alzheimer's later on with chronic progressive lack of sleep. So sleep is super important, I would say.
I think anyone who follows professional sports knows that LeBron James, who's in his early 40s, talks about sleep, and he gets between 10 and 12 hours a day, and it allows the body to reheal. And he's in his early 40s playing professional basketball. So sleep works, and we see that often. Moving away from sleep and into nutrition, what's the impact that nutrition has? We all know we're supposed to eat better, but what's the reality of that impact for longevity?
I would say that we should probably stay away from the word diet, in the sense of a temporary measure of losing weight, and just talk about lifestyle of certain nutrition. And there are different kinds of lifestyles. My recommendation would be to stick with the one that you can sustain longest and it's healthiest. So stay away from processed food because that's inflammatory, and stay away from something that, like sugar drinks, for example, that's probably horrible.
So Katarina, from your perspective on nutrition, what's your thoughts?
With food, I would say food is fuel, it's medicine, it can be enjoyable. I think all of those things can be true. I think we all know, so I won't go into the basics, that, food is overly processed and we should try and stay to whole foods. And for whatever reason, we don't do that. What really gets me, and women are really guilty of this, is when they get into this calorie counting and these fad diets, right? So when we think about these fad diets, right, there is a keto diet, and a paleo diet, no carbohydrate diet as an example. There's many of them, but I don't partake in them. So for me, I don't know what the latest trend is. What I would say though is that, paleo, you might have a different way of looking at things, and no carbs, you might remove your carbs altogether, but removing carbs has an adverse effect on your kidneys. So I guess I would say all calories are not equal. And, you could take a pack of chicken McNuggets that are 250 to 300 calories, but you could also have 3 whole eggs and a piece of toast. And, one is going to be more filling, more satiating, right, and has higher protein. So I would advise probably people to focus less on calories and more on nutrition. And we could do a whole segment on nutrition, but we don't have the time for that. If I gave one piece of advice, I would say focus on protein, because we all don't have enough of it, and Taya just alluded to this. Protein is single-handedly the engineer of synthesis of muscle. And we talked about muscle and the importance of muscle in longevity. So if we don't have enough of it, we need to get more. And that's whether you're a carnivore, vegan, or vegetarian, you can get enough protein.
So Katarina, what do you think about alcohol and the amount you should consume?
Look, alcohol in its chemical compound is ethanol. So it's toxic, no matter which way you look at it, right?
It's fuel, it's gas.
The studies do show it's toxic. But in practicality, people drink alcohol, and they do drink it in moderation, hopefully. I don't look at it as much as quantity, and maybe I'm biased because I'm a bit of a foodie. So, and I also come from an Italian, or my husband's Italian, and I come from a European background. So when we sit down to have a meal, we have a good glass of wine when we go out for dinner. I think it's important to look at less the quantity as much as what is alcohol doing and what role does it play in your life. So we talked about sleep earlier, and we know that some sleep deprivation is a real thing with alcohol consumption, especially early on prior to going to bed. Also, it can have an impact on your memory and your concentration. And so I think looking at alcohol and what impact it has is probably more important than counting exactly how many glasses of whatever your alcohol of choice is. But I would say for the most part, most people know if they're having too much alcohol, and they should self-reflect on that.
Yeah. Katarina, from your perspective on the 3 pillars, what's your insight?
I think when we're talking about longevity, we can't talk about physical health without talking about the cognitive and emotional health. And emotional health is something that's underplayed significantly. So I'm not going to have a discussion here on the DSM and diagnosis of serious pathologies, because that's a different segment. But when we talk about the average Canadian and even across the world, I think what we see is this real strain on young people. When I think of a young person who's, if they're lucky enough to live in an apartment and afford one, it's usually like a shoebox in a 500 square foot space where they're moving from their bed when they wake up to the kitchen to have their breakfast, and then going and working the whole day, and then it's a triangle. And unless they have an outlet to be able to go out and have social interactions, that will suffer for long term when we think about prevention. With workaholics, that's another example, type A personalities, right? There's a lot of investment that they put in their professional careers and what they have to do and what their goals are, but do they invest the same way in their relationships? And I think women, we're really guilty of this. We have a lot of negative self-talk. Like there's a certain amount of perfectionism that we want, whether it's from our children or from our spouses or what we do in our careers and leadership. And I think that we have to check ourselves a little bit there, because I think that that's not healthy. And long term, and I mentioned it earlier, is you can't have good physical health and then poor cognitive health when you're using the term longevity in the same sentence. Similarly, you can be in excellent cognitive health, but if you can't get off your chair, well, that's a problem too. There's a podcast that I saw, and it actually wasn't even a podcast, it was online, where they talked about this concept of eulogy versus resume virtues. And resume virtues, there's successful people, they make a lot of money, they do really well in life, but when they die, does the individual who's going to say the eulogy go up to them and say, wow, they did this project on time, or wow, they came under budget, or their bank account has this many figures? No, it's probably either a brother, a sister, or a friend, or someone who was meaningful to them, who talks about how they were as a person, right? And how they were as an individual.
Not about their career necessarily.
Not about their career, like more about what really matters. So I'm not saying throw away your goals and your aspirations, absolutely not. I'm just saying that you can't have a conversation of longevity without talking about emotional health and the investment in those relationships, along with your physical
forms
health.
Part of it. It's just so the holistic, the 3 pillars, so on and so forth. This has been fantastic. I think there's a lot of information that has been shared that we've all heard little bits and pieces over, but you've made it so simplistic to understand. But any final words of wisdom?
I would say longevity isn't promised by years. It's earned by choices. So act wisely, live intentionally, and let your habits guide what your longevity is going to be.
I think everyone who's watching today is going to take a piece. I think it's all relative. There's so many things we talked about that we all can bring our own life experience, our own family history, our own understanding of the things we talked about. So I think it's great. I think there's a lot of information out there, and we did, you were able to both answer those questions and give it more concise and provide some ideas. And so you've provided clarity, which I'm sure will be well received by our advisors who are watching today. So thank you both so much for this. This has been fantastic. Our next webinar is going to be on women in wealth. Look out for that, and thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great day.
My name is Michelle Roussin. As the head of tactical field underwriting at Truestone Financial, I look to support tools that will contribute to the field underwriting process. These tools are not only important but crucial for the team here at Truestone, our advisors, our clients, and the technical underwriter. You see, underwriting is a mandatory process that determines more than the insurability. It determines the final pricing. So we must invest as advisors in firms upfront. That's why I had to roll up my sleeves and fully engage when BMO Insurance rolled out Rover AI. Rover AI provides two significant advantages for us in the field. One, it's easy to access via the BMO Insurance Advisor Support website. So no matter where I am, whether at a lunch meeting or in a client-facing meeting, at the click of my device, I can log in and start creating the underwriting plan. Second, it's real time, it's interactive. It doesn't only deliver the potential rating or pricing, but it also provides questions and key items to help us create the path forward. So with this, I say bravo, BMO Insurance. This is a game changer for us in the field, and it is our go-to tool at Truestone Financial.
Hi, my name is Giancarlo Vitaliano, Senior Director of Advanced Underwriting at PPI. Working with the underwriting team at BMO has been an excellent experience for me overall, especially on our complex high net worth cases where collaboration with the underwriter is essential. The working relationship that I've developed with the underwriting team has really helped us obtain the most optimal outcome for our advisors and their clients. Their depth of knowledge in both medical, financial underwriting is clear, and their willingness to engage us early on challenging files, whether it's navigating nuanced medical histories or complicated financial scenarios, it really makes a meaningful difference. When it comes to the ultra high net worth cases where reinsurance is required, working with BMO, we did find that they're willing to advocate for our cases to get the best decision available for the client. Having the sort of back and forth, peer-to-peer discussion on our files is something that we've really come to value, and they've really made us feel like true partners when we're working together on our cases. Since most of the files we work on are in the high net worth market and therefore in general more complicated cases, having this sort of back and forth peer-to-peer discussion on our files is something that we've really come to value, and they've really made us feel like true partners when working together on our cases. Since most of the files we work on are in the high net worth market and therefore in general more complicated cases, having this sort of partnership with BMO actually makes for a much simpler process, less negative surprises, less hurdles to overcome. So when we have an advisor who wants to work with BMO, we know that we're going to be getting the communication, the feedback, and the advocacy that we need to get the best outcome.
Hi, I'm Jeff Langdon. I'm the head of technology for Canadian Wealth and Insurance. Rover AI is our generative AI-based chatbot that we launched to our external insurance advisors and their teams. Basically allows you to ask Rover questions around underwriting decisions, BMO insurance policies. Since launching Rover late last year, the uptake has been fantastic. We're seeing lots of use of the platform, some great feedback from our insurance clients, both through the platform itself as well as on social media. Information that you would have previously had to look up yourself or call in and speak to someone to get the information, you can now do with a few clicks of the button and in 30 seconds accessing Rover online. The advisor feedback has been critical to how we're planning out our roadmap for Rover 2.0. We've taken their feedback, we've looked at the types of questions that they're actually asking Rover, and that has formed what our priorities are for the types of capabilities that we want to add back in. One of those main capabilities for 2.0 will be the ability for Rover to answer questions about BMO life insurance products. So you'll now be able to go in, ask questions about the product, the features, the processes for how you actually apply for the products, making it more efficient for our advisors to work with us. Rover 2.0 is a critical part of our commitment to a digital transformation. It is a key online digital tool that we're enabling for our advisors, make their work more efficient, give them an alternative way to interact with us through an online channel. What they would have had to spend minutes on sourcing the information themselves, they can now get in seconds through Rover AI. Also internally, it's given us great experience with the capabilities that we'll look to apply in other areas of the life insurance business. Rover 2.0 makes the advisor journey more efficient.